It was late on September 29th, 2022, when reports started to surface about a shooting at a property in Gnangara. Gnangara, a semi-rural area north of Perth, has a history linked to criminal activity. In the year 2000, a man named Antonius Peter Chick, known as TC, was operating as a mechanic out of his workshop and living in Gnangara. When police raided his property, they discovered a significant quantity of illicit drugs, including methamphetamine, LSD, amphetamines and cannabis. TC claimed he was not the mastermind behind the operation. Instead, he told authorities that a group of 7 or more intimidating Bikie-like men had shown up at his workshop, demanding he hand over a motorcycle. Not long after, TC said he was lured to a staged vehicle breakdown where he was assaulted by a similar group. He was then handed a mobile phone, and an unknown voice on the other end ordered him to retrieve and hide a large blue bag filled with narcotics. TC argued he had no choice but to comply, fearing the consequences of disobedience. The courts, however, did not accept his version of events. Instead, they labelled him a mid to large scale drug dealer and sentenced him to 11 years in prison. The Gnangara property, where the drugs were seized, located on Sydney Road, remained in use as a mechanical workshop long after TC's conviction. It was at this very same property, on that late September day in 2022, that Joe Versace, a 34-year-old father and alleged underworld enforcer, would meet his end. Joseph Versace was many things to many people: a son, a brother, a father, and a friend. Born into a close-knit Italian family in Western Australia, Joe was deeply loved by his parents and siblings, who spoke of him as a protective brother and a man with a heart of gold, fiercely loyal to those he loved. His sister, Connie, described Joe as the family's pillar of strength, especially after the death of their father, Mario, in October 2020. Joe's life, however, was not without fault. In 2007, he was involved in a severe motorcycle accident. Though the accident could have been fatal, he survived thanks to critical medical intervention. Despite this, it left him permanently changed, both physically and emotionally. On a GoFundMe page, Joe's sister revealed that after the accident, he struggled to cope with the lasting effects of his near-death experience. This struggle led to a dependency on drugs, which pulled him into a cycle of legal troubles. Over the years, he faced charges such as possession of a prohibited weapon, drug possession with intent to supply, aggravated burglary, and theft. Connie shared that Joe's young daughter was deeply affected by having a father who was repeatedly in and out of jail. Her appeal for financial help to send Joe to rehab was made out of desperation, but it gained little support, both in donations and in breaking Joe free from his addiction. By 2015, Joe had become entangled in a criminal underworld. He was implicated in a criminal enterprise focused on the sale of illicit substances and gained a reputation for his physical presence in high-stakes situations. Police and media reports tied him to outlaw motorcycle gangs like the Rebels and Comancheros, labelling him as muscle used in meetings and disputes. Despite his criminal record and associations, Joe's family insisted that he was more than the sum of his mistakes. His sister often pushed back against media portrayals of him as a hardened criminal, describing him instead as a man caught in a cycle of addiction and poor decisions. Just quickly, if you're enjoying the video so far and want more stories from the Australian underworld, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It really helps me out and helps the channel grow. By September 2022, he was still deeply involved in drugs and surrounded by individuals connected to that world. It was precisely his entanglement in that dangerous lifestyle that brought him into the path of Joshua Duperouzel, the man who would ultimately become his killer. The events leading up to Joe's murder on the 29th of September 2022 were a culmination of tensions between him and Joshua Duperouzel. Duperouzel, a 26-year-old with a long criminal record and connections to the Rebels Bikie gang, believed Joe owed him a $3,000 drug debt. On that fateful day, Duperouzel set out with deadly intent. Duperouzel's actions began with the careful planning of his movements. He turned off his mobile phone around 3:56 PM so that he couldn't be traced. Driving his black BMW, its license plate ominously reading 666, Duperouzel arrived at the workshop in Gnangara just before 4 PM and parked about 2 kilometers away. There, he changed into black trousers over his shorts, put on black gloves, and held a piece of black material that served as a mask. Carrying a Luger 9mm pistol, Duperouzel was dressed for the crime he was about to commit. He then drove to the workshop and got out of his car, now fully masked and disguised in black attire. Inside the workshop were 5 other individuals, 4 men on the ground floor and Joe upstairs. Duperouzel, holding his gun, demanded from these 4 men to know where Joe was. At gunpoint, they directed him to the mezzanine level. Duperouzel then made his way upstairs to confront Joe. When he found him, Joe was holding methamphetamine in his hand with cash on the floor nearby. A verbal altercation quickly escalated into shouting as Duperouzel ordered Joe to put it in the bag, referring to the drugs and cash. In the midst of the argument, Duperouzel fired 3 shots into the mezzanine wall, likely as a warning shot. The tension between the 2 men then turned physical, and in the struggle, Duperouzel fired a fatal shot, striking Joe through his right eye and exiting just behind his left ear. Duperouzel then grabbed an unknown amount of cash and fled the scene. He abandoned his BMW in a nearby Glen Forest street before vanishing, leaving behind shock and devastation. 3 out of the 4 men downstairs had already run for cover upon hearing the gunshots, but one of them managed to call emergency services. Paramedics arrived at the scene around 4:11 PM, but Joe was already declared dead. According to investigators, from the moment Duperouzel arrived and changed into his disguise to Joe's death, all happened within the space of 15 minutes. 15 minutes that would change countless lives forever. In the hours following the shooting, dramatic images captured by photographers showed the gravity of the crime. Family members of Joe arrived at the workshop in visible distress, their anguish evident as they grappled with the shocking news. Among those at the scene was senior rebels Bikie Joe Raimondi, a figure well known in Perth's underworld. His presence, offering comfort to members of Joe's family, raised immediate questions about Joe's connections to bikie gangs. Joe Raimondi's appearance at the crime scene was significant. He was a close associate of Nick Martin, the former Rebels bikie boss, who had been assassinated at Perth Motorplex in December 2020. Martin's public execution, a rare and chilling act, sparked outrage and intensified police crackdowns on bikie activity. Raimondi's loyalty to the rebels and his high rank within the gang made his attendance at the Gnangara workshop both symbolic and provocative. He was even fined for displaying his rebels bikie gang insignia, specifically his prominent rebels tattoos, which were visible when he was filmed and photographed outside the crime scene. Western Australia has strict anti-bikie laws that prohibit the public display of gang insignia, including tattoos, as part of efforts to curb gang activity and intimidation tactics. Despite widespread speculation about Joe's connections to outlaw motorcycle gangs, Joe's family vehemently denied any claims that he was affiliated with bikie gangs. His sister, Connie, stated firmly that while Joe was no angel, he was also no Hell's Angel or member of any bikie group. For them, his ties to bikie figures like Raimondi were incidental, not indicative of deeper involvement. However, Joe's funeral on the 17th of October 2022 painted a different picture. At the centre of attention that day was not the coffin with the Italian fashion house insignia, but the attendees. Held at St. Bridget's Catholic Church in Northbridge, the service was attended by a large crowd, including men covered in tattoos and sporting distinctive mullets, a look often associated with the bikie culture. Amid the ceremony, however, there was as much interest in who wasn't there as who was. Police kept a close watch over the proceedings, noting the absence of several high-profile figures who were under anti-consorting orders or dispersal notices. While several mourners were sporting a colourful array of tattoos, high-profile members of the Rebels gang did not attend, one of them being Joe Raimondi himself. Those who could attend wore ankle monitors, further underscoring the underworld presence at the funeral. The service continued at Pinaroo Cemetery and concluded fittingly with an Italian wake at Pasta in the valley. The political sensitivities surrounding the murder, particularly given Duperouzel's alleged ties to the Rebels Motorcycle Club, were clear. In the days following Joe's murder, police launched a large-scale manhunt for Joshua Duperouzel. Public appeals were made for information on his whereabouts, with his photo and name broadcast widely. Simultaneously, police conducted raids across Perth in an attempt to suppress bikie activity and prevent retaliatory violence. Duperouzel's arrest came swiftly. On the 3rd of October 2022, just 2 hours after police publicly named him as the suspect, he was located at a Belmont park. In a bizarre turn of events, Duperouzel approached a woman in a park and asked her if he could have a sandwich. He revealed to her that he was a wanted man and expressed a desire to turn himself in. The woman, alarmed by the situation, called the police, who arrived within minutes and arrested Duperouzel without incident or gunfire. The entire arrest was caught on camera, showing police swiftly swarming the park, taking Duperouzel down and escorting him away. Witnesses watched from a distance, with one describing the scene as chaotic. They saw police instructing Duperouzel to get down and then taking him into custody with his hands behind his back. Despite the surreal nature of his surrender, Duperouzel did not have the murder weapon with him. Police later confirmed that it had never been found. He claimed to have forgotten what he had done with it, adding to the mystery of the case. After his arrest, Joshua Duperouzel appeared in court the following day, where he made a denial of sorts regarding his background and associations. When his past and connections were mentioned in court, Duperouzel spoke up to tell the magistrate that the rebels' bikie gang had nothing to do with his current situation. He insisted this was a personal issue, not related to his involvement with the gang. However, subsequent information revealed that Duperouzel was indeed connected to the rebels as a debt collector and had been involved in a drug-related side hustle, which he claimed was the reason for his actions. During the initial police interview following his arrest in Belmont Park, Duperouzel admitted to having some drama with Joe over a $3,000 drug debt. He expressed his intent to resolve these issues, saying he had brought a gun to Gnangara for protection, in case Joe was armed himself, but denied any intention of using it. Duperouzel maintained that the shooting was unintentional, a result of the struggle that broke out between the two men. Nevertheless, police charged him with murder, and his initial plea in court was not guilty. His claims about the situation highlighted the personal nature of the conflict, suggesting it was not directly bikie related, despite his connections to the gang. In October 2023, Joshua Duperouzel made a significant change of plea when he admitted to the gangland-style murder of Joe Versace. Initially, Duperouzel had pleaded not guilty to the charge and was set to stand trial in November of the following year. However, in a surprising move, he changed his plea to guilty during a brief hearing on October 10th, 2023. This change came after a pre-trial conference where Duperouzel's lawyer, Luca Margaretic, indicated that the decision was made after discussions and the preparation of an amended statement of facts. These negotiations were crucial in securing the guilty plea, although the specifics of these discussions were not disclosed in court. This change of heart marked a significant departure from his previous stance. It meant that Duperouzel would no longer need to go through a lengthy and potentially complex trial process. The decision likely reflected the strength of the evidence against him and his realization of the implications of going to trial. With the guilty plea, Duperouzel moved directly towards sentencing, scheduled for February 2024. This would allow the court to quickly address the matter without the need for a trial, where the details of the crime would have been thoroughly examined in front of a judge and possibly a jury. The plea also had significant implications for Duperouzel's future. By admitting guilt, he was facing a potential life sentence for the murder. The change in plea was not only a legal maneuver, but also a shift in strategy, likely influenced by discussions with his legal team about the overwhelming evidence against him. For Joe's family, the guilty plea was a necessary step toward closure, allowing them to finally confront the loss of their loved one and the implications of his tragic death. The sentencing of Joshua Duperouzel took place on the 27th of February 2024 in the Supreme Court of Western Australia. Justice Anthony Derrick presided over the case and delivered a stern judgment, emphasising the gravity of Duperouzel's actions and the impact they had on Joe's family. During the sentencing, Justice Derrick described the murder as a very serious crime, highlighting the premeditated and dangerous conduct involved. He noted that Duperouzel had armed himself with a loaded gun, taken steps to disguise his identity, and had the intention to recover a debt using threats of violence, which ultimately resulted in Joe's death. Justice Derrick acknowledged that while Duperouzel did not intend to kill Versace, the crime was committed during a robbery, making Duperouzel guilty of murder. The prosecution did not accept the existence of the $3,000 debt, as it was never substantiated in court, but Justice Derrick stated that this detail was irrelevant to the core issue, Duperouzel's responsibility for the fatal shooting. He noted that the shooting resulted from a struggle, and while he had not intended to kill Joe, he was still responsible for the death given the reckless circumstances under which he discharged the firearm. Justice Derrick pointed out that Duperouzel's involvement with the Rebels Bikie Club was also irrelevant to the sentencing decision, stating that it was a personal issue and not directly tied to the crime. However, it was mentioned that Duperouzel had been operating as a debt collector for the gang and was involved in selling drugs independently, which contributed to the complexity of his criminal history. Despite the lack of formal evidence linking Joe to the Bikie gang, the initial speculation and media reports had caused significant distress to his family. Ultimately, Justice Derrick sentenced Duperouzel to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 14 years. This sentence reflected the severity of the crime and the tragic loss of Joe's life. Duperouzel's previous record of criminal activity, his use of drugs, and his involvement with outlaw motorcycle gangs were all factors that influenced the court's decision. The judge noted that Duperouzel's guilty plea was mitigating, particularly because it had spared Joe's family from enduring the trauma of a trial, but it was not enough to warrant a lesser sentence given the circumstances of the crime. For Joe Versace's family, the sentencing brought mixed emotions. His mother, Marianne, expressed relief, stating, "We got justice today." Yet his sister's reaction conveyed lingering grief and frustration, believing the minimum sentence was not enough for the loss they endured. She recalled how Joe had promised to walk her down the aisle one day, a moment that would never come to pass. Joe's daughter, however, is the real victim of this tragic story. Now just 14 years old, she will face her formative years without her father, a sobering reality that underscores the devastating ripple effects of senseless violence. By the time Duperouzel is eligible for release, she will be just 28 years old, a young woman, probably forever shaped by the loss of her father. In the end, Joe Versace's life, and the lives of those he left behind, serves as a reminder of the consequences of violence, the complexities of loyalty, and the fragile nature of justice. His story is one of loss, but it also reflects the resilience of those who loved him, determined to honour his memory despite the darkness that took him away. As always, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Till next time, take care.